Okay, everyone, I have 1 o'clock here Pacific time, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you for your interest in the Archivist-in-Residence program. And this particular program is still in pilot mode. What that means is that we've been approved to run the program, but we have to basically sort of repropose it to be accepted as a permanent program with Northwest Archivists. And of course, with 2020, the year that it was, instead of being a 1-year pilot, we've moved to a 2-year pilot to navigate some of this. So just so that you're aware of that. Move my slides. There we go. Real quick, I want to introduce you to the members of the committee because it's been a lot of their hard work to make it possible, and several of them are here with us today to talk about the program itself and walk through those elements with you. First of all, I am Rachael Woody. I own Rachael Christine Consulting, and I am the chair for the Northwest Archivist Paid Internship Committee. And with us is Sarah Piasecki. Oh, and Sarah, I'm so sorry. She's not at the Anchorage Museum anymore. She's with the National Park Service. So I'm sorry, Sarah, I need to change that. Rachel Thomas is here, George Fox University. We have Catherine Kramer, who's not with us today, but she is on the committee and she's at the C.M. Russell Museum. And also not with us today, but in spirit, is Erin Stoddard at University of Oregon. And then, of course, Laura Cray at the Oregon Historical Society. And we do have a guest presenter here with us. She was our first host site supervisor, and that's Crystal Rogers with the Labor Archives of Washington. And just a real quick thank you to our sponsors. In our first year, we had 6 amazing sponsors: Lucidia, Hollinger Middle Edge, Schellinger Research, Emporia State University, and Digital Transitions. And many of them have become sponsors for this next year. And we've been able to add on permanent.org as one of our gold sponsors, and then added 2 bronze sponsors, the Gaylord Archival and Northeast Document Conservation Center. So thank you to those and NWA membership for making this program possible. So our agenda is we're going to try and keep it brief, but we are going to walk through what the Archivist-in-Residence program is, especially since it's a little unusual and it's certainly new to us, only going through 1 year so far. We're going to talk about eligibility requirements. We'll then go through financial information and management. We will review the application questions and sort of what we hope to see in your answers there. And then Crystal is going to share with us what their experience was as going through the Archivist-in-Residence program. And then we received several questions in advance. And so whichever ones we don't answer as we walk through the application together, we will also address at the end. So there will be time for those. All right, so I'm going to minimize this presentation. We're going to hop over to the website and pull up where you will find it. And I'm going to pop this in the chat for you too, in case, wherever my chat went. Perhaps somebody else can do that for me. I seem to have lost my chat window. But it is northwestarchivist.org/archivist-in-residence. And I will get us kicked off with the overview. So we are offering a $5,000 stipend, and this is for a graduate student. And what we mean by graduate student is someone who's graduated with a bachelor's and they are enrolled in or recently graduated from a master's program. The purpose of this and our goals for this program, the first is to offer upcoming and new professionals paid career opportunities to develop yourself professionally. Our second main goal is to teach you as new emerging professionals how to accurately calculate and advocate for your value, your literal value as a professional. And then our third goal for this program is to provide an opportunity for organizations to work toward that long-term goal of being able to offer these paid internship opportunities in the near and long future. So we're hoping that this program can sort of serve as a catalyst and support toward there being more paid new professional opportunities for everyone in this field. Now, so part of this program, we really put an emphasis on the newer professional and what their career goals are. And so as a result, we really like to see the proposed resident in this case lead the project generation, lead the project idea as based on what their interests in the career is, and working then with the host organization to make sure that that project would also benefit them and what that might look like. So this will be a joint application between a resident and a potential host institution. Some of the requirements, if you do become the recipient of the Archivist-in-Residence Award, there will be a monthly report from the resident to the committee just to keep us updated on what's been started, where you're at. This is really just a check-in mechanism to make sure the resident's getting the support that they need, making sure the host organization is seeing what they want to see in terms of the program working, and just making sure everything is on track. And then at the end of that residency, the host organization's responsibility is to submit a report of the whole experience, and then that is submitted to the committee. And then as far as eligibility goes, again, you're either enrolled in a graduate, so master's level program, or you're recently graduated within 2 years of the application date, which for this year is March 1st, 2021. And for this particular program, while obviously we are talking about archives, it is not limited in terms of what type of graduate program you're in. So you could be in an archives program, you could be in a museum studies program, you could also be in a computer science program, biology program. We really didn't want to limit it because we know that there are a lot of professions that have outside insight and skills that they could bring into archives. So we are very encouraging of that. Let's see. Then the only other portion for eligibility to cover is that this program is under the auspices of Northwest Archivists. And so those host organizations that are part of the application, while you don't necessarily have to be members of NWA, you do have to be in one of the member states, which for us is Alaska, Idaho, Montana, Oregon, and Washington. Now, for the resident themselves, they don't have to be residing in any of these states, and depending on what project you put together, there is the possibility of remote work as far as the program committee is concerned. That is a perfectly acceptable way to do a project, and as you'll hear from Crystal, due to this year, their project ended up being, I think, basically 100% remote. So know that that is a possibility for those residents out there. And then I think the only other thing I want to mention is that for whoever that host organization is, we just, as the committee, we want to make sure that whatever collection is being worked on, that it's actually owned by that host organization and that you have the permissions to do that work on that collection. So that's I think the last eligibility point to cover. So with that, I will mute myself. I'm going to move the screen up and hand it over to Laura, who will walk us through the financial management piece.
Right. Thank you, Rachel. I want to start by pointing out that when we all came together as a group, one of our core goals with this project was to find a way to address the devaluing of archival labor and to advocate for more equitable wages within our field. And with that in mind, one of our areas of focus here is to create resources for new career professionals to learn that process of writing a grant and setting a wage for that. When especially early career professionals are hired for a grant, usually that grant has already been written and funded, and that wage is not really a negotiable point. And so this is an opportunity to kind of like get involved in that process a little bit earlier, and to give you some of the resources to start looking at what it means to have an equitable wage and to identify what your work is worth. And also for the host institutions, this is kind of a way of giving them those resources as well to push the point that historically there's been a tendency to save money on a grant with the idea that it's more likely to get funded if it's not as expensive, by undervaluing the labor of the people that are hired to do that grant work. So we're asking you to take a moment to look at, to build your own salary for this project. You can go up to $5,000. We encourage you, we have the money, please, budget up to that. Don't feel like you're more likely to get funded if you make a lower budget amount. But find what you and your host institution feel is an equitable combination of that hourly wage to number of hours for the project scale. And when you're doing that, we want you to look at this MIT living wage calculator. This is when we were doing our survey, one of the more useful tools for finding that calculator. There are other resources out there. So if something, if you have a salary survey that's relevant or other information like that that you want to bring into that calculation, so long as you let us know what you're using for that basis. That's why we made it so open-ended. Please feel free to bring those types of resources into this conversation as well. And we also want you to kind of factor in the level of education you have completed and also the level of independence and expertise that the project you propose is requiring of you when you're doing that. We had two questions that came up in emails in advance that I think are worth mentioning just while we're talking about this section. The first one was someone whose project they're proposing to be remote entirely, and the applicant does not plan to live in the region that the host institution is in. And their question was, should the cost of living be calculated for the host institution or the applicant? 2020 was a year when a lot of norms for work changed, but like conventions have not really caught up with that. I'm not really sure how they will look in the future, but for right now, convention tends to be that you go with the host institution as the place where you set your cost of living from, and it's up to you to kind of balance that out on your end. So go with the host institution for where you're calculating that from. And the other question that we had is, which I think is actually going to be relevant for a lot of the regions in the NWA kind of umbrella, is what do you do if you live in a high cost urban area that is in an otherwise very rural region that has a much lower cost of living that has brought down that cost of living in that urban area? I would say there's a place where you can list other factors to factor in your budget. Please make a note of that there and explain why you are saying that the cost of living should actually be up a little bit higher at that point. And the last thing I wanted to bring up for the successful applicant is that following that monthly report where you report the number of hours you've worked and your progress, the monthly stipend will be paid out by the treasurer. So you'll get paid with a check on a monthly basis. So that kind of covers the broad sweep of the financials. And now I'm going to pass it on to Rachael Thomas to talk about the questions.
Thank you very much, Laura. We're going to go through the questions really quickly and talk about why specific questions are there and what we're looking for, what we're trying to learn from them. So Rachel's pulling them up for you. As you see on the application, there are questions for the intern and there are the resident, and there are questions specifically for the host institution. While we've placed them that way, we want you to work together on this. It's really key that this is a joint application, and that's how it was designed, that you are applying together. And that's because our goals are twofold: to give you some relevant work experience in archives, and also to help host institutions think about what a paid internship can do for their institution. So as you see, I'm just going to go right through the questions. The first question for the applicant: what skills, education, and previous experience do you have that will be utilized for this project? Tell us about yourself. What is your educational background? What skills have you already developed that you plan on using for this? How is it applicable to your career goals, and what skills do you hope to strengthen? Talk to us about where you hope to head after this internship. Where are you trying to get to? And how do you think this internship will help you be there? Saying something like, well, I want to be an archivist and I need some hands-on experience. Okay, yeah. But like, give us some more information. You're really interested in processing or digital skills or something like that, and this will give you the hands-on experience, or whatever other experience you think this is going to give you that will give you a leg up as you're applying for positions. The next, how do you see this project benefiting the host institution? A good internship will benefit both the intern and the host institution. They're not going to bring you on and devote staff time and energy if there's no benefit to the institution. It takes a lot of time, energy, and money to host an intern, even when they're not paid. And this is a paid internship. So please be aware that that is something that your host institution is doing for you, and your project should be a benefit to them. Part of this question is also getting at the idea that an internship should never be replacing a regular paid position. And so we want to be really clear about the work that you're doing will benefit them, but you're not filling a staff role that should be a regular paid staff position. The brief description of the organization and archival materials relevant to the project. Like we said, brief description. We want to know who you are, what's your background a little bit, and then what is this collection they're going to be working with. We're looking for a little bit, a mini scope and content note here. Tell us what this collection is all about and why it's interesting, why you should be working on this. What resources are required for the residency and how will the host organization provide those resources? So we want you to think through things like supplies, computers, technology, expertise and staff to supervise the internship, a space to work. Very practical considerations are important. If it's going to be entirely remote, what does that look like? Are you going to provide the student with a Zoom account? Are you going to provide them with the things that they need to do this job effectively? So how are you going to make that happen? Number 3, list any current or past participation in Northwest Archivists or in other regional areas. We want to know about how your host institution has been involved with both Northwest Archivists and other professional organizations. It's important that we do use institutions that have been involved so that they can show how beneficial this is. This is supposed to be kind of a guiding light to hopefully support equitable pay in our profession. Now, this doesn't mean that if your institution hasn't hosted and done a bunch of things at the regional level that we're going to not look at them. It just means we'd like to know how you have been involved in the past. This is not something that we're going to say that archivist has never presented, you're out of luck. No, that's not what we're looking at. Next is, how do you feel this residency will help you further your organization's commitment to ethical labor practices and equitable treatment of students and new professionals? So one thing we really want to point out here is, while we think it's very important, we do not want to see cut and pasted DEI statements here. We really want to hear about how you are working to figure out how you can address equitable labor practices in your archival program specifically. While those DEI statements are really helpful and you're welcome to mention there's a campus-wide effort to do this, that's okay, but we want to hear specifically how this will help you do this better. If you say, we're going to use this internship to explore the benefits of having a paid intern, that's great. And then the host site supervisor committing to supporting the Archivist-in-Residence during this project on a day-to-day basis. What will training and supervision look like? We really want to know practically on the ground, are you going to meet with them daily? Are you going to check in? How are you going to communicate? This is really important. A good internship is supervised, has someone who's experienced in the field giving advice and helping an intern along. An intern, it should not be brought in as the expert coming in to do something brand new. It doesn't mean they don't have wonderful things to offer and that they shouldn't be doing that, should be, but they need to have a seasoned professional who is helping them along the way and guiding them, supervising them. The point of internships is to help you grow and learn. And so if we're not doing that, if it's not well supervised, that's a problem. So we need to hear this very practically in this question. I think that covers all of our questions. So I will turn it back to, let's see, I think we're back to Crystal and Abby, Crystal to talk about the first internship.
Hi, thanks, Rachel. So my name is Crystal Rogers. I am the processing archivist for the Labor Archives of Washington within the University of Washington Libraries in Seattle. I was the site supervisor for the Archivist-in-Residency this past year and worked with Abby Maynard, Archivist-in-Resident, who cannot be here today, but she did share some of her thoughts with me, which I included into the talk I'm about to give. And we worked together to develop the application for submission to match collection work at the Labor Archives with Abby's desired learning objectives. And later I helped her in supporting, I helped Abby in supporting her to fulfill these objectives. Next slide, please. So the timeline, unsurprising to everyone, was we had to push back the initial timeline to begin in early summer due to the COVID-19 pandemic shutdown. And we had hoped that the libraries would reopen by the start of fall quarter so that she could access the physical collection, but it became pretty quickly apparent that the library was not going to reopen for the foreseeable future. We are still closed. So we decided that it would be best to plan for completing the residency remotely. And Abby did all of this work from the great state of Iowa. So she was doing all of it from Des Moines. And we were able to pretty seamlessly, successfully pivot to a completely remote setting and still meet the objectives outlined in the application, which you can see these main objectives listed here on this slide. Abby was primarily working on the arrangement and description for the Ridge records, which Ridge was an environmental activist organization active in Roslyn, Washington from 1988 to 2014, and consists of 9 boxes of organizational records, as well as some digital and audiovisual materials. Next slide, please. So Abby was able to get virtual hands-on experience evaluating a detailed folder level description already compiled during initial rehousing and inventorying on site back in 2019. So we do all of our inventorying using Google Sheets via this processing template that you'll see here. And this is the one that Abby worked on. And so she was able to take what our volunteer who had inventoried it to perform some much needed QA and the folder level descriptions. So getting experience applying DAX as well as local requirements to normalize the metadata and get things consistent. Next slide, please. And she also evaluated the inventory to propose an intellectual arrangement for the collection in a digital processing plan, which we use Google Docs for. We have a template for that. And you can see a snippet of that on the left-hand side of the slide. So she implemented that arrangement once approved within the Google spreadsheet, along with revisions to several important fields within the finding aid, including the administrative history note and scope and content notes. Abby also gained experience working with EAD to edit the Ridge Records finding aid, published on Consortial Database Archives West, and used encoding software XMetal, which luckily she was able to access via remote desktop and get into one of our computers in the special collections processing room. Next slide, please. Among her other important contributions, Abby compiled daily processing metrics, as well as doing some digital outreach work promoting the Ridge Records via the Labor Archives social media and the UW Libraries blog, as well as the Northwest Archivist blog. She also added finding aid links to relevant Wikipedia pages to the Ridge Records and drafted a new Wikipedia article for the Ridge organization, which is still in its draft phase and awaiting approval. And because Abby was extremely efficient with her time, and also because we weren't able to do any of the physical rearrangement of the materials to match the intellectual arrangement, I was able to pivot Abby to a few brief descriptive updates projects, including updating a previously confusing intellectual arrangement in the finding aid for the Washington State Federation of Labor Records. And she helped prepare another collection for intellectual arrangement that I will have another student work on in the winter. Next slide, please. So what helped make the residency so successful? Most importantly, the Northwest Archivist Awards Committee and Abby's flexibility and understanding with the challenges presented by COVID-19. Abby was also a fantastic resident who was self-directed, very communicative with me, and eager to learn. It was a fantastic experience working with her. I wish we could hire her today, full time. I will say that the application process and deliverables were also clearly outlined by Northwest Archivists, and we were given plenty of room to shape the residency in a way that fit both of our needs as resident and site supervisor. I also really appreciated the regular check-ins from Rachael to make sure everything was going smoothly and remind us about deliverable deadlines. And I will say, as a site supervisor, I had to compile an end of residency report, but it was very doable expectations as far as what was expected to provide the awards committee. We also benefited from the Labor Archive's pre-existing processing workflow, which already included the use of digital tools like Google spreadsheet inventories that Abby was able to access online, and being able to access the necessary software through remote desktop to be able to do the EAD editing. She was also able to correspond with Doug Kilgore, donor of the Ridge Records and founding member of the organization, who was very generous and helped answer a lot of her questions about the collection and provide additional historical context about Ridge and about the records as needed. And I will say one of the most successful outcomes of the residency from my perspective as a processing supervisor is an expanded understanding of what can be accomplished remotely. Working with Abby to onboard, train, and collaborate virtually helped to shape the Labor Archive's remote processing workflows and increased my confidence in continuing to accomplish these processing projects remotely, even after we returned to working on site. So I'm really grateful for that. Next slide, please. So as far as my recommendations to site supervisors, most importantly, another big aspect of what made it so successful was keeping communication between myself and Abby open and routine. So we would check in at the start of shifts. She would check out with a very quick progress report at the end of shifts. And then we had 1 hour weekly check-in meetings for more in-depth questions and discussions. And I will say this is all the more important in a remote environment, not only for keeping things moving, but also ensuring that the resident doesn't feel completely isolated when we're not able to see each other in person. This can all be facilitated remotely there's a lot of really great digital project management tools and communication tools. You'll see a little snapshot on the right-hand side of the slide of our processing workflow. We use Asana, an online web tool for that, where I can assign tasks. We can kind of keep track of where things are at within the workflow. And then using the digital chat tool Slack for our routine check-ins, and when Abby had quick questions that needed to get answered to keep the project moving that didn't necessitate a formal email. And then of course, where would we be without Zoom? We used that for our in-person weekly meetings, as well as for training. So you can share your screen. And so I was able to show her how to use the XMetal software to do the encoding for the finding aid. All those things are out there and helped make it possible. Like I mentioned earlier, Abby needed to pivot to other projects. So I'd recommend having other things in the hopper that are in line with the learning objectives that you outline at the start of the residency application process in the event of unforeseen barriers like a global pandemic or the project moving along faster than you anticipate. Finally, I will also say that I think it's really important to include the resident in other staff meetings and events to acknowledge their work and to expose them to the inner workings of the larger repository and make them feel included as a professional. This is another huge component of professional development, right? Like you need to understand how your work fits within the larger context of the institution of which you're a part. Next slide, please. So I asked Abby what she wanted me to convey to you all today, and she left us with this really wonderful quote that made me feel very happy that this was her experience. She said, "The Archivist-in-Residence was a chance to really transition from student worker to a colleague. That the program differed from other work experience that she'd had in the past because it was a chance to feel like a collaborator instead of just a student executing another archivist vision." So I'll say with that, if there's any overarching goal that you should have as a site supervisor, I think it's aiming to provide the resident with this real professional level experience that gives them the freedom to grow and feel valued as a fellow professional And of course, all the while making a living wage, which is what we all deserve. Next slide. And then this is just my contact information. Feel free to send me an email. I'm happy to share my wrap-up report with you or answer any questions that you might have about my experience as the first site supervisor. And thanks for having me today.
Thank you so much, Crystal, for that great overview. And thanks to Rachel and Laura for leading us through some of the aspects of the Archivist-in-Residence application process and budget creation process. With that, we did get a few questions submitted ahead of time, so we're going to take a moment to go through some of those. But this does conclude the formal part of the presentation. So for those attending, if you do have questions and you're not seeing them yet, go ahead and put them in the chat box and we'll take a look at those next. So with that, the first question I believe I have in here. To apply, do I need to find a host institution first? Rachel Thomas.
Yes, you do. As we said, it's a joint application between you and your host institution. We need to see how it's going to benefit both of you, and that you're prepared to do all of the things that a real internship takes, and that takes the host institution's involvement. And we really are counting on you to create an interesting internship on your own.
Excellent. Next question. Do I, as the possible resident, create the project, or does the host institution?
This kind of goes along with what I've been saying. It needs to be a joint effort. The host institution may have great ideas, and hopefully you guys can have a conversation and discuss what that might look like. Bring your learning objectives. Say, this is the experience I need to get. This is what I hope to have so that I can put it on on my resume for future job applications, and then discuss that with the host institution and see if that's a need that they can meet.
Mm-hmm. Next question. Would it be appropriate for me to reach out to Northwest Archives and ask if they would be interested in working with me on this?
Yes, definitely. You may have some that are overwhelmed right now and you don't hear back from, but you should definitely reach out to potential host organizations and ask them if they would be willing to consider applying for an internship with you.
And related, is there a list of potential host organizations? And I assigned myself this one. We do not have a formal list. However, any organization within the Northwest states that we listed earlier are eligible. They don't even have to be members of the Northwest Archivist Group. If you have trouble even knowing where to start, especially for those residents who may be out of this region, please feel free to send me an email. My email will be on the last slide of this presentation. It's consulting@rachelchristine.com. I'm also the email that you'll use when you submit your application. So if you have trouble knowing where to start, please let me know, because I'm sort of the message board essentially for people looking for partners. The other thing I would recommend is if you have like a city or state that you're particularly interested in working with, go and visit. There's on the Northwest Archivist website, there are committee members listed and board members, and there is a state rep for each of the states in the Northwest Archivist. And I encourage you to contact them. And especially if you're a resident who has the type of organization in mind or a type of project in mind, craft a little like abstract and ask the state rep to send the abstract out to their list, soliciting potential partners to write back to you. So that would be my other tip, and is perhaps the more effective one, is if you know sort of what area or type of organization, reach out to that board member and get the word out that way. And the next question, is it possible to submit a proposal for residents for a community archive? And for this one, so as long as the community archive is in the Northwest region, and as long as that particular organization has the permission and the rights to do the work on that collection, then that checks the eligibility markers. The other thing I would add to this, though, and things in what we have said throughout the presentation, is this really needs to be a good experience for the resident as well. And so there needs to be subject matter experts and people on site, or well, in COVID times, on site available for the resident to work with, receive training, receive supervision. If they need a particular expertise, like if you don't have an archivist on staff at this community organization, you can reach out and partner with an archivist at a different organization to help oversee that project. I would ask that community organization if they have existing partnerships already first to see if you can get a collection expert there. The other thing I would recommend is that I am a consulting archivist. I know there are a few others in the Northwest area, and myself and I know others have given pro bono their training and supervising time to a resident to help them get that aspect of that supervision and training when working with the community archives. So there's a couple different ways to do that. Just make sure that you're getting the support you need essentially, and checking those eligibility check marks. All right, and next question. I think we're getting into some of the financial ones that Laura did help cover earlier. Let me see if I can move there we go. I'm working with a student to apply, and we're working on a potential telework internship given ongoing uncertainties and a project that lends itself well to distance. Question is, should the intern base their cost of living research off of my host location or the area they are living?
Yeah, and just to reiterate, at least for now, the primary determinant should be where the host institution is and not where the applicant is currently residing.
And I would say it would be interesting knowing that there are higher costs of living. I think if there's a real disparity, like the host location is cheaper, but where the intern is living is more expensive. As you have seen, the committee is very focused on making sure that the intern resident is being paid their worth. So I think if that's out of balance, like be transparent about that and how you did your calculation, and we will appreciate that. Yeah.
I was gonna say, I would agree. If last year's debates were, as we were reviewing our applications, were any indication, we're more interested in that you have thoughtfully put together a budget and that your project is well put together and worth doing, well thought out, more than getting into the nuances of that. So if there is a really big disparity, that's probably not a barrier if you just explain it as one of the other factors.
Yes. Great. Thank you, Laura. Oh. All right. And I think this is the last of our prepared questions. My location is a weird little high-cost pocket within a large rural county that dilutes the cost of living wage. And I think this is Breckenridge, Colorado, or Jackson, Wyoming. If given an option, I would prefer to use a higher wage than the living wage calculator indicates, even though it would reduce the number of hours available. Is that possible?
And again, here, this is part of why we left the budget so open-ended. If you list that as one of the factors, we will probably be very open to accepting that. This is similar to if you have institutional policies with the host institution that you are working with, or other factors related to your experience or the education or the skill level required for the project you are doing. All of those things show your work, and so long as it's a viable budget, it's totally reasonable.
Excellent. So those were the formal questions. Here's my email up here, consulting@rachelchristine.com. And I'm going to exit out of full screen and see if we got any chats. If I could find that menu to pop back up. Here we go. Yes.
I don't see any unless you have some on your side, but I was wondering if I could jump in with a comment.
Yes.
Thinking about as we were going through the description of the project, I wanted to reiterate that the project we selected for the 2020 Archivist-in-Residence was a very traditional archival processing project, but that is by no means the only thing that we are looking for here. If you are interested in being in a different facet of archival work, by all means, please consider doing that. Don't feel like we're only looking for processing. I mean, if you have a processing project, those are welcome, but feel free to be creative and innovative in the ideas that you present.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Any other comments, questions, concerns, either from the audience or the committee or Crystal? And I'll give it a few minutes too. I know somebody told me one time it took at least 90 seconds for a question to form, which sounds like an eternity on Zoom calls. So we'll give it a few minutes.
I'll jump in with another comment. When we're reviewing applications, we're looking more closely at how well you've thought out the work. And do you have a plan? Do you understand how long this will take to do your different parts? Is it actually feasible to conduct in the limits of the internship? We're looking closer at that than like, do we think that this collection is the most essential collection to be processed or worked on? Do we think this project is the most essential thing? The most important thing for us is the experience for you. And that really is our key criteria. So if you're like, well, I think this collection would be interesting, but they're probably not going to think it's that important, that's not our key criteria at all. And if it is processing and that's what you want to do, that definitely is going to get the same processing, and other types of projects are all going to get the same level of, we're going to look at them. So they're all completely welcome. But I echo what Laura said. We'd love to see other types of projects as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, one last call. Thank you so much for offering this webinar. It's been very helpful. So that's good to hear. Thank you, because this is the first time we're doing an informational webinar, especially as this is the second time we're opening applications, which we're really excited about. And we had such a great time, and we felt like such satisfaction and fulfillment from seeing the project be so successful this last year. So I know everybody on the committee is excited to see what you come up with for this year. In the meantime, if you do come up with questions later, I know that always happens to me, please feel free to email me, consulting@rachelchristine.com. And if it's more of a group question, I'm happy to send that out to the committee. And otherwise, I just want to remind you the application deadline's March 1st. So do try and get that in. You've got a little bit of time left. And if you're struggling to find a partner, whether it's a host with a resident or vice versa, also please reach out to myself or others on the committee to help connect you. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and let us go. So thank you all so much. Thank you to Crystal for giving her perspective on this, and to Abby, of course. And thank you to the rest of my committee who helped not only create this, but continue to put such hard work into it.
Yes, and thank you, Rachel. We really appreciate all you've done to bring this to light as well. So
thank you. All right, everybody, take care and stay safe.